Hello, everybody, and welcome to Revolution Gathering. It's August 24th. It is like a million degrees in my house right now. But yeah, we're going to get through it. We're going to do this. We've got all sorts of new technology. We've got a computer table. We've got the phone hooked up. Now I can use my side table for all my reading and messages. So we're moving with grease. So thank you all for supporting this work and making this possible. Yeah, and so, hey, if we do get cut off, I'm just going to continue to go because it will record the whole talk. So we don't have to do two talks like we did last time, but hopefully we're good. So everybody keep your fingers crossed. And here we are. It's good to see you all. Hey, don't forget to like and subscribe. We can really use that. That helps a lot. And if you're listening to us on Apple or Spotify or another channel, please leave us a 5-star review and let everybody know what you think and how much you love it. I mean, you can leave less. I get it. We want you to be honest, but 5-star reviews help. Likes help get us through the computer's brain and gets more people to see the talks that we're doing. And we're also doing a ton of clips lately. Hope you've enjoyed those kind of little tidbits of the talk. So today, what I want to talk to you all about is, well, first I thought I would just be kind of give you an update. Last week I was pretty sick. And I think a lot of it had to do with just depression. I've been feeling a lot of depression lately. I've had depression my whole life. I was diagnosed with something called double depression. And I know I thought it was made up as well. And, but it's not. You can Google it. You can Google anything really and something will come up, but double depression. And so, yeah, past few weeks, my part-time work just completely shut down. And, so I've been living off of, Revolution work and, we just haven't been bringing in the funds that we need to bring in. And that gets to you and you start to wonder if what you're doing makes a difference and that kind of thing. And, and then all the news we see, the constant horrors in Gaza and, with what's happening with our immigrant brothers and sisters on the streets every day, a president who seems to drive us all crazy. So, it's tough. Anyhow, so yeah. Oh, I appreciate someone said they're going to pray that I find another job. Yeah. I mean, hopefully I find something that works with this and works with my children's schedule. It's, it happens, but I had a few big box stores turn me down for some reason. When you've worked for yourself for so long and you're like, yeah, I worked at a record store 20 years ago and I worked at the Gap 30 years ago. And my little part-time jobs are like, digging ditches and painting houses. So I don't know. It's been tough. Anyhow, woe is me. It's not woe is me. It's just depression is tough. And I think we're all going through it. And I think it's normal because I really do believe like the world is in a crazy place right now. And it does seem insane and it doesn't seem right. I mean, when we're seeing the militaries like walking the streets of towns and cities and so much fighting amongst each other and our politicians, I think having negative feelings about that is normal. And I think having, working on radical acceptance, talking to others is helpful, but sometimes it just gets overwhelming. And I guess what I want to say is that's okay. That's just part of it's part of being human, and allow yourself to be human and allow yourself to feel that. So, but that's where I've been. I've just been kind of down and, depression for me isn't necessarily being sad. It's just feeling, having no motivation and just feeling exhausted. And, for me, it's like, 30 years into this work and, struggling more now than I have in a long time with that is, plays with your head a little bit, but I love this work. I love it. And I do it out of a compulsion to tell people about grace and love and acceptance. All right. So today we are going to talk about Christianity. Shocker. And the idea is, has has Christianity made us worse? You're probably going like, "What?" That doesn't make sense. Has Christianity made us as people worse? It's wild because I was listening to Bart Ehrman's podcast, and he doesn't believe anymore, and so it's really funny because they're like, "Has Christianity made the world better?" And they have their opinions, but I think it's an odd question, probably coming from someone like myself who's been doing this for so long. But I think it's worth saying, and I think it's part of where we've been this year in our talks. So the last talk, I don't know if you guys saw it, Paul and sexism. Uh, we talked about, basically how there's 7 books of Paul's. That's almost half. That's more than half of his books, isn't it? Actually, 13. I can't think it off the top of my head, but are not Paul. There's a lot of Paul, and a lot of them are reactionary Paul, and saying things that the Apostle Paul never said, and actually saying the opposite type of thing. And I think what that can allow us to do with some folks is maybe give them a little bit more of empathy towards why they might have some of the feelings they have and think the way they do. Unfortunately, I don't think as humans we need to have a book like the Bible to give us morals. I think loving people is not something that we should have to be told to do. Like, I remember, what was that True Detective movie, and the guy who's one of the detectives was like, if you need a religion and the promise of a afterlife, happy afterlife, to make you a moral person, then that person is a son of a bitch. He's like, that person is a horrible person. It's like people are like, I would be a serial killer without Jesus, which is insane. So I think that's worth thinking about and talking about. But I think some ways so we've got to kind of reclaim the talk we have about the Bible, and it shouldn't just be that you have to go to seminary, or that you have to read uh, biblical scholarship and biblical history to understand that the Bible is not perfect. And unfortunately, a lot of folks, boomers and Gen Xers, and even a lot of people go to church and they just don't question, and they don't really understand the book. And it's really wild. And it says something about humanity is when we're willing to subscribe to a religion for all of our lives and not know the truths about the religion itself. And for a lot of people, it really shakes them when they realize that Christianity, or the Bible especially, isn't perfect. Because a lot of people have Bibleatry, like idolatry, but for the Bible, and like, it's a holy book. It came down from God, every jot and tittle, and then you find out, well, not actually. And we do have folks called apologists and apologetics who will come in and try to explain that to us and try to say, oh, no, it all works. Don't worry. It's all still perfect. It's all still held together. And those guys are, bless their hearts. That's what I want to say. I get it. I mean, they're hoping for the best, um, but they're not, it's pseudo scholarship, and it's not something I buy into. So anyway, I wanted to talk about that. And so we talked about the problems with some of the Paul's writings that are, not the Apostle Paul. They're what's the word I like? Uh, Not the Apostle Paul, but I had one the other day, and it was really clever. Oh well, I'm not feeling very clever this Saturday. Tomorrow's my Sunday. Tomorrow is my son's birthday. He's turning 10 years old. Oh my gosh, and I can't believe it. I can't believe he's going to be 10, and it's a lot to take in. And I remember parents and people saying that kind of stuff to me when I was 10, and thinking like, oh brother, and that's what he thinks every time I'm like, I can't believe you're turning 10. But yeah, isn't that wild? So, seems like just yesterday. Gosh, all the cliches, right? So has Christianity made us worse? It feels like sometimes the folks, sometimes the Christian, and I don't really watch a lot of like Christian stuff from Christian videos, but I end up seeing it because I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook and things like that. And sometimes I'll see like stuff that Dan McClellan is talking to. And I usually, I mean, sometimes it's like shooting fish in the barrel. I mean, he's like, talking about stuff that's just wild and kind of crazy. But there's other times where it's like, you know, pastors who have thousands and thousands of followers who say really horrible stuff. And they almost sound like they're Bond villains. Like the way they judge people and talk about people, it's as though they sound like, like they should be, and they're using Christianity as an excuse. I mean, I was listening to one guy like, yeah, the first time I was canceled, because I went to his Instagram, and I'm like, I get it. I can't stand cancel culture either. But dude, the reason people were saying cancel you, which is not, doesn't happen very often, to be honest with you, like it did when I think of my family, where it was like we were canceled and the conservatives and the liberals both turned on my family. Because usually when those guys say like I was canceled, they mean by people who weren't really listening to them anyway, and so they just kind of be like, oh, I'm suffering because all those people who hated me still hate me, or disagree with me still disagree with me, and it's cancel culture. I still have 8,000 followers. But these folks, they, the words like canceled are being used for them because they're saying horrible things. They're saying horrible things about women. They're saying horrible things about people in the LGBTQ community. They're saying strange, horrible things about foreigners, and they're saying horrible things about wars. And they're using the Bible as an excuse. So it's almost that opposite of like, well, I need the Bible to make me a good person. It's almost like a lot of folks use the Bible to justify discrimination and even pick up new discriminations, new things to discriminate against, right? Like, it's like, oh, well, here's something else I can feel bad about. And, and it's like, what? It's like, here's something else I can discriminate. Here's somebody else I can discriminate against. And I'm going to toe the line. And I'm not going to look deep, and it's a tough, it requires a lot of unlearning on their part. They've got to learn about new things and understand how the Bible works and how the Bible was written. But it's also like they have to unlearn a lot of that legalism that sits there. And if anybody who's grown up in like evangelical circles, what that's like. Even when you're set free from that kind of thing, there's still those old ways of thinking that kind of like, oh, am I making this up? Am I justifying? Am I tickling ears and all that kind of stuff? But it's weird to see some people use these kind of these judgmental attitudes, these really hateful attitudes, and almost wear them as a badge of honor. I watch some of these guys and they just really seem to enjoy the suffering of others and somehow justify it with their faith. And to me, that doesn't seem like much of a faith. And it seems really cruel and unusual. And it's as though they can't see it, as they become blind to it. And it's very, to me, it's kind of disturbing. And it's hard because that's why we call Revolution Gathering and not Revolution Church and all that kind of, I mean, there's other reasons as well, but two or three gathered together. So some folks have, a simple faith too. We've got folks with just simple faith. My mom had a real simple faith of like, God loves you. He really does. She just wanted people to let them know they were accepted and they were loved and that God made no junk. And, and it was beautiful and it was celebrated. And, I think about that verse where it says, they'll know you by your love for one another. And that's what my mom was known for, is for her love for other people. And I'm grateful for that. And she's often celebrated for that. But then there's times where like, it's been interesting to see, especially on Facebook, because I have a lot of folks who maybe follow my parents, follow my dad. And then some people who saw this Charisma magazine picked up a clip that I put up and put it there. So some of those folks came. I've had to do a lot of blocking, and I don't like blocking because I don't like to give up on people. I do like to have tough conversations. I do like to try to practice what I preach. But sometimes, like, I'll put up a clip and talking about the complicated issue, and well, this wasn't really in the Bible originally, and this was added, and this goes here, you know, and they'll just say really bizarre stuff like, there are some things required by God, and I just trust God, and you have to trust God if you want to make it to heaven. They'll just say really like random stuff like God has ultimatums, or God has, morals, and it's just as though like, well, I don't want to. They're like, I don't want to try to argue with what you're saying. I don't even want to try to interact with what you're saying. I just want to let you know that for some reason I think you're wrong, and I think God's in control, and I think you shouldn't be messing up the way things are. It's just like, and I get it. Like if you're in your 50s, 60s, and 70s, maybe you're just like tired. I don't want to see any more change. I got to rethink this whole thing. I mean, I understand that, but I just trust God, unfortunately, isn't getting us a lot of places. And I think if we've learned anything over the past few years, especially with kind of the rise of this, more biblical scholarship and, people like Pete Rollins, who are philosophers and things like that, is that we do need to go deeper, and that we do need to understand what this religion is, and what is and what isn't part of this religion. Um, and we need to question these things. I think it's vitally important. But problem is a lot of people just don't feel like it. Like I said, and I get it. I mean, it's complicated, and people are tired, especially now. I mean, people are really tired, especially now. You're going, Jay, are we going to talk about the Bible today? We are. We're talking about it now. Don't worry, I've got it right here. But it feels like but it also feels like people are at best using religion to ignore the horrors of the world in some ways, and to ignore the suffering of others at best. and and at the worst, to support them, and to support them with pride. Like I said, these guys, they usually have some sort of like military colors on. They're all sitting around with really fancy mics, and they're like, women need to listen, or you can't question the president, and you're like going like, these are like pastors, and it's just bizarre. Like, anyway, if you know my history, I've questioned liberals and Democrats and Republicans and both. I'm a little more to the left, yes, but I don't just shill for anyone. But it feels like at best we're using religion to kind of ignore these things and just live our lives and have our own personal Jesus and not worry about the other people. And at worst, it seems like, you've got a lot of leaders out there with a lot of people who follow their church and participate in their work, that are using them to support them with a bit of pride and arrogance that I find a bit unnerving. And as a child, when I saw leaders like that, I remember thinking like, well, there must be something I don't understand. There must be some secret adult thing that I don't understand, that when I grow up, I'll understand why these folks are the way they are. And I'll be 50 in December, and I will tell you, I have not understood why the way they are. It mostly seems like insecurity, and maybe a needing to belong, and a fear of being rejected by people, or being insecure financially, or being rejected by your tribe or something like that. Because I know a lot of these guys who went to seminary learned these things, and then they just ignore it. It's funny because I was telling this story about last week about how people in seminary would often get out of seminary, and they'd have this, scary look on their face, like, oh my God, I've seen too much. And the part I didn't tell is like some of those people would come back into the church and just ignore everything that they learned there, and act like it wasn't, that they never, just those hard truths are never brought up. And I have to say, I feel like it's disgenuine, but I understand that it's probably done out of a great insecurity and fear of not being included. I'm such a, I'm a loner. I'm a rebel, Dottie. I'm such a, I don't, I'm keep to myself. I'm very introverted, so I've been able to shoot myself in the foot a lot over the time. But it's also because, like I said, it's that compulsion to say if I find something that's true and that's something that's been compromised and even myself has compromised over time, and now I've realized, oh, I got this wrong. I feel like it's so important that it needs to be shouted from the rooftops. And a lot of folks just aren't that way. But I also remember, being younger and sitting in rooms with pastors and them talking about universalism. I mean, like, I can never preach this, but I have a feeling that there is no hell, or that we're all going to go to heaven, but I could never say that in the pulpit. So, I remember hearing stuff like that. There are pastors who don't even believe in this stuff anymore. They just are afraid of losing what they have. I mean, I think the reason most people don't do a lot of this stuff and critique the church the way I often do and critique both sides of the church is because they like having their past, this to be their job and not have to look for other jobs constantly. Because that's a frightening place too. I mean, that just wears you down. It wears your mind. It wears your soul. It wears your work down. It makes you not, makes it harder to be a dad. It makes it harder to be a person and to participate. So let's look at Matthew 7, if you're following along with me. And I feel like Matthew 7:6, with my fellow Christ followers, too often, quite a bit, especially on especially on Facebook, and that's just the where Jesus says, "Do not give what is holy," or it's said that Jesus said, "Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine. They will trample them under their foot and turn and maul you." And it seems like almost like somehow people have thought that this verse is the fruit of the spirit. Like, oh yes, we should, you know, we should yell at these people and tell them they're not really Christians and explain God to them in a horrible way. And as though they don't read the part where Paul says, if someone asks something or someone gets, be well, if you know something they don't, be willing to give a response, but remember to do it in gentleness and kindness. It's though maybe I skip over parts and I negotiate what I want to see in the Bible, but they've negotiated another part, and it's often quite disturbing and quite hateful. I mean, to take someone and just question their whole life's work based on the fact that they don't agree with your theology. Sometimes I think about like how, I knew my father wanted me to be a pastor or at least be a Christian in my whole life, and that's best that he wanted. But then there's the fact that I did it and I've become a pastor and I've done it for 30 years. I've been sober, gosh, for almost 28 years, 29 years, gotten around there. And yet I chose the wrong kind of Jesus, the wrong kind of Christianity for my dad. And, that's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking that we have this kind of exclusion where we can't sit down and argue well and disagree well, but that we'll just exclude others just completely. And that continues to create that division. Like, well, you've just got it wrong because especially when it's based like on, well, you're including the wrong people and you're winking at sin and you're doing this, and you're just, it's disheartening, because for me, especially now, I'm like, well, I went and did some classes in seminary. I've studied these things that I know you've never studied. I mean, it's just, it's tough to handle with the church, and I'd say we don't, and as far as like this crushing one another and kind of turning on one another and saying those, it's not, the left does not have the corner on this. Okay. Because we are called to love each other. We are called to love our enemies and love those who persecute us and things like that. Now, I want to talk about Dobson for a second. Dobson just passed away. I think Dobson was a horrifically dangerous person and probably sowed a lot of discord into families' lives. Just probably made a lot of people's lives really miserable and probably really divided a lot of families and sowed discord amongst homes. I mean, I remember silly stuff where they would, like for masturbation, you want to tie your hand to the bedpost. I'm like, well, this now you're going to have some weird fetish about having to have your hand tied, your hand tied to the bedpost. He wasn't a very kind human being. He could be downright hateful and prejudiced and sexist and I don't know, racist. I don't know his stuff on race. I never studied Dobson all that much. I get it. Like I get why people are upset. I don't like. There was this bumper sticker I used to like, because this thing was called "Focus on Your Family," and in Colorado, some people had a sticker that said "Focus on your own damn family." And I always wanted one of those. But then yesterday I was online and I saw like a very progressive Christian person post this thing that was like, if you think we were disrespectful about Dobson, wait until the orange man dies, And I'm sitting there going like, how does that reaction express Christianity any more than what the other people are saying and doing? Like, how does the left going like, well, we are going to celebrate when you die and we're going to have a laugh and we're going to talk about it. And I understand having retrospectives and saying, this person was, not great and stuff like that. But then saying, and then we're just waiting for the president to die and we're going to celebrate that. And to me, I get that as a human being. Like I get like, oh, I understand. I don't like our president. I didn't like Dobson. But at the same point saying, well, I hope there's death and we're actually planning on a party if there is death. And I don't think is really Christianity. I understand, when Jerry Falwell died, I felt relief. Dobson's gone. I'm sure a lot of people feel relief and better. But to add some sort of glee to it doesn't seem to be following the teachings of Christ. And I think we have to see that as well. Because if we do want to have a bridge where we disagree well and we argue well, we're not going to be able to do that when we're doing stuff like that. And there's a lot of hypocrisy on all sides of Christians. So that's why I asked the question again, has Christianity in some ways made us worse? I mean, when we can't even understand the very basics of the faith. I'm getting into preacher mode on basics of faith. Let's look at Matthew 5, folks. Jump back into Matthew. A lot of Matthew today. Some say this is the Jewish gospel, more of a Judaism centered gospel. So let's look at Matthew 5:43. You have heard that it was said, more here these beatitude stuffs, and you've heard, you have heard it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. Now listen to this part, though. This is the part that really made me think about this. This is what I woke up thinking about today. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? Ironically, Matthew was a tax collector. Matthew didn't write this book, by the way, but Matthew, the story of Matthew is in here. And I wonder when Matthew heard him say that, he was like, really? Gentiles and tax collectors must have been just like, God, Jesus, just lighten up a little bit, friend. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only the brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even Gentiles do the same? Therefore, be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, I will say again, this is progress, not perfection. It doesn't happen overnight. But this is the concept of Christianity. And I think any of us who are trying to be like, I've got a better Christianity, but leave out these parts of Christ's teaching, we completely miss it. So why do we talk about arguing well? Why do we talk about disagreeing well? Why do I try to build bridges for folks? Is because I do think that will lead to change. I do think that will lead to growth. And I do think it will lead to a greater change. But if we can't, it's not really a better version, or it's not really like, oh, I found the true Christianity, except the fact that I can't wait for you to die and celebrate that. And I can't wait to mock you online. And, honestly, there's also a part of me that when I see that type of thing, I think, I can't be online when my dad dies. I can't because because people love to say horrible things about televangelists, especially televangelists that have said very unpopular things or done unpopular things, and they love to celebrate these type of things when people they don't like dies. And I know a lot of people don't like my dad. I have issues with my dad, you know, and I have issues with my father. Um, but they're mine, and he's my father. He's also my kid's grandfather, and so it's tough for that. So I guess I'm seeing it, and that's what you're going to get here at Revolution from me is that I'm seeing it from a perspective that you're not going to hear it from very often. That there are other human beings on the other side of that who may even have complicated relationships with those people, but still need a chance to mourn those complicated and work through that stuff without you, a stranger, coming along being like, yeah, that son of a bitch, I'm so glad he's gone. They're going to hear that anyway. So I think if we're going to say like, well, I've subscribed to the following teachings of Jesus, maybe we just shut the hell up. Or maybe we go like, hey, we know a lot of you are out there, and this is, this probably brings up a lot of hurt and a lot of pain for people who were hurt by this person. And, we're really sorry that you were hurt by this person. And, you don't have, there's a way we can do it that's a lot more constructive than destructive. And I'm not going to say deconstructing, destructive, like, with realizing that, even talking about the hurts and pains that have been caused by others may help other people to go like, oh, I see how that person affected your life. And now it gives me like, maybe I missed it. Imagine a world such as that. I feel like almost sometimes I'm preaching like what a TV show would be like. I've been accused of saying kumbaya. And I'm not a kumbaya, but I just get like, what happened to all the verses about love? What happened about like Corinthians 13, like love never gives up, never loses, always hopeful, endures through every circumstance, doesn't demand its own way, keeps no record of when it's been wrong. What happens with verses like that? What happens with the like the whole, what is it? First John, I think. First John, is that one? That's the book. I really like First John. It's a really loving, graceful, hopeful book. So what happens with those types of things, or the verses that we just talked about? What's happened to those? What have we become? My dearest friend. Everyone I know. Okay, no, we won't get into Nine Inch Nails right now. But what have we become? And why do we hold on so tight to our insecurity and our anger and our these almost hateful ways of living? Because when the Bible does talk about dying to your flesh, picking up your cross, that type of thing. And for me, I was raised to believe that those verses had to do with something completely different and out of touch, like die to your flesh and hate those people. It wasn't die to those flesh and love those people. It wasn't take up your cross and die for those people who hate you as well. That's what it was saying. It wasn't saying you take up your cross because you're going to have to hate a bunch of people. Pick up your cross because you're going to have to say, forgive them, Father, because they know not what they're doing, even though they're putting you on a cross. So to me, that's the radical parts of Christianity and grace. So for me, I almost feel like I'm getting these blurred lines now of just going like, well, there's just another judgmental, hateful Christian. There we go. That's just another Christian who's just, they love a lot of the same people I love, but it's almost like they're tempting me to give in to my own anger and hates and resentments, and to not try to deal with those in a way that is more productive. And it's not productive for me necessarily, but I think it's productive for all people more necessarily. I think it could be more self-satisfying to be like, to be judgmental and to be angry or to be like, well, my politician is the best or whatever, because it's just, it's an attitude. And I think it's an attitude that is probably so prevalent in any types of faith. And it doesn't matter what side you're on. It's just legalism and judgmentalism and fear. They all kind of run together and they just creep in. Matthew 23. I'm all in Matthew today. It's just literally a coincidence. These are just the ones I was thinking about. Matthew 23. Matthew 23. Yeah, Matthew 23, 14, or is it 15? I think it's 15. I'm going to go even a little bit further than that. Let's go to 13. But woe to you, scribes and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you lock people out of the kingdom of heaven. For you do not go in yourself, and when others are going in, you stop them. Grace police. Woe to you, scribes and you Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you cross sea and land and make a single convert and make them into a new convert twice as much a child of hell as yourself. He's saying like, we've become where we've created these people that, twice, and I'll say it, like some of these people that go to these pastors who are so black and white and have such binary thinking and have such prejudice. And then you see the people who attend their churches and go to their church, and often they are much crueler even than that person, because they're down there on a normal level where you can communicate with them, and they're out there and they just stand by like these cult of personalities in a way. And I've seen it on progressives and I've seen it in conservatives. I'll say I see it more in conservatives, but I'm starting to see it some with progressives, is just a hateful us and them type of thing. And people becoming, kingdom monitors or grace monitors of who gets grace or who gets into the kingdom or and then turning people into like, well, okay, you can judge these people. It's like both like sides are saying like, well, now you're just trading one group to judge for another group to judge. And to me, I'm like, how do we stop from judging each other and how do we have a tougher conversation? And I'm not saying like, we can't say like that person's bad and their politics are misguided. That's just noticing something, seeing something, making kind of a personal moral judgment, but make a judgment where they're just like, they're just not of God and they deserve to die. And they're, like when we just take it so far, because we're all going to judge someone. We're all going to have feelings of how we feel. We're all going to have decisions that we make about how people act and how we react to that. And it's okay to disagree. Disagreeing is not judgment. What happens is when it's judgment is when you give the final, like, canceling someone is judgment. Kicking people out, saying there is no hope, that's the judgment I'm talking about. Over at Matthew, where are we? Matthew 23. Did we do that? Sorry, everybody. It's very warm in here today. Oh, that's what I was looking for. Sorry, I've joined this new way of marking my notes, and it's very interesting. In Matthew 23:14, it talks about, compares the Pharisees and the religious teachers to brood of vipers, like a pit of snakes, like a scary, vicious pit of snakes. And I don't know about you guys, but for a long time, especially after my parents' scandal and things, I had really struggled to go into churches. I don't even like to go into churches much now, to be honest with you. I still act a little bit off, because there is this fear that you're going to get judged, that you're going to get beat up, that you're going to say something wrong, that you're going to offend people. I mean, there's a fine. Have you guys ever seen? I'm sure you've seen I'm not sure because we're all different ages here. But have you ever seen Portlandia? And in Portlandia, there's the feminist bookstore, and you know, and so the women that run the store are run by, they're two actors. One guy is in drag, and the other woman is the singer. And so in Portlandia, they go in and they'll just be like, like, hey, like the one time a worker guy came in, he was like, hey, I got to move this box over here, and like, sir, could you please not say box, and like, they're very triggered. Everything kind of triggers them, and they're very, so, but they handle it in a very way, like very self-righteous way of dealing with people that they don't see, or they don't feel or understand feminism. And then I was thinking about this comparison between the fine line of the church lady. The church lady's like, isn't that special? They made fun of my parents on the church lady as well and stuff like that. But she's like, who could it be? What could make you want to do this? I don't know. And then she'd go like, Satan, and so you've got like, and it's funny to see like you see these two severe, comical adaptations of playing up. And I remember my dad saying like, oh yeah, I knew a total church lady growing up when I was a kid. Like I knew like that's a real person. Like my dad's like that. We knew ladies like that, and I've known a lot of people like the ladies in the feminist bookstore in Portlandia. And, and these two, there's this fine line. I mean, not only that there's men in drag playing these people, playing women, but also just this fine line of just what severe belief systems can do to us and how they can divide us and build these walls up in between us. And we become, judge, jury, and executioner, and so it's kind of this reminder of like, there's these worlds, and I just see both of these types of worlds, and I've stepped into churches that have either vibe. But for me, it's just, it's hard because you go into the self-protection mode. It doesn't matter if it's right or left. If you see this, like, well, we'll through, this comedian, Neil Brennan, he's like, well, conservatives, you can kind of come up and say, hey, I'm a conservative. I'm like, oh, come in, brother, blah, 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 And then he's like, with liberals, like, hey, I'm a liberal. And the other liberals are like, nah, we'll see, like, so you kind of get these weird, severe worlds where, I always go in like, who am I, whose foot am I going to step on today? I recently had a person say I was a man without any tribes. I don't know if that's true or not, but my work is to try to say, hey, let's all take an honest look at ourselves. And this is how we change. And this is how we become community. And this is how we grow better. I mean, it's going to be messy. Spirituality is messy. Faith is messy. Humanity is messy. I'm just saying there's another way. And I've been told quite a bit that the way that I believe these things and the things that I preach are pie in the sky belief system. So that's, that's fun, fun to hear too. And that's been from friends. So there you go. Take that for what it's worth. We're almost done here, folks. In Matthew 12, 33. This is the brood of viper ones where it says, either make the tree good make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For the tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you speak good things when you are evil? For out of the abundance of our hearts and the mouth they speak. The good person brings good things out of good treasure, and the evil person brings evil things out of evil treasure. And I think that when I say stuff like, where you're constantly in a mode where you're just judging people and cutting them out and being triggered and offended by them, or blaming, oh, you sound like Satan, or, oh, you don't sound like you belong to my tribe. Those are those kind of not great fruits. So what are the fruits of the Spirit? Remember we talked about that in Galatians at the beginning of the year. What is the fruit that we know that people have? And I think this is good to look at. Like when people would argue with me about the ex-gay movement, I would always just say, give me any decent fruit from the ex-gay movement. You know, all I see is tearing apart homes and suicide and things like that. And now you could say the same thing about Dobson. Is what I've seen more people hurt by that type of theology and that type of pseudoscience and pseudo psychology mixed with religion. I've seen so many people torn apart by that who don't want anything to do with Christianity, and their families were torn apart and they treated each other horribly because of that like pseudo religious science. So what is the fruit from that? That's the fruit. The fruit is the destruction. It's not how many people go to the church or if they drive a Cadillac or if they're very successful and sell millions of books. It's what do you see coming out of that? What is the real fruit? And Paul tells us that the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Those are the fruit. So do we see things coming out of that? And I think for a lot of people in religion, we don't see that type of fruit. And so that's why I woke up today going, actually, I mean, it came to my mind like I was thinking about it last night, but it's like, has Christianity really made us better or has it made us worse? Has it, are we all, you don't have to follow the faith of Christianity if you want to be judgmental and angry. I mean, you can have it, but you don't have to use it as an excuse. You can just be like, I'm a human being and I have an opinion. Because otherwise I don't feel like we're trying to find out what Christianity is trying to tell us, what kind of peace that passes understanding, because it must pass understanding. Because if I have got to love my enemies, and I love how Dr. King always said, thank God he said love and not like my enemies, because I can't like who they are or like what they do, but I can love them. For me, it's like, what is it trying to tell us to work with each other? And I also want to let you know, I don't sit here, and this is not coming from a place of judgment myself. This is more of coming from a place of desperation and hope and grace, and preaching grace for so long and seeing areas that can improve by being more graceful. I mean, that's why I went in to say, okay, these parts aren't Paul, because Paul talks so much about grace. And there's a lot of people who have kicked Paul out of their faith system because they read the pastoral epistles, because they read Ephesians, and what it says about there, or because they read that part in Corinthians that was added later, and they go, I just don't want anything to do with that asshole, And I was listening to Bart Ehrman, who's a biblical scholar and an atheist, as far as I understand it, or at least not a Christian anymore. But he was saying no, Paul is not. And this was afterwards, which was really weird, because somebody's like, oh, you got to listen to this Ehrman thing. Because I got some of the inspiration from some of Ehrman's writings, but I'd never heard his podcast before. So I listened to his podcast. He goes, no, Paul is not this guy. Paul is not this Mark Driscoll Calvinist type guy. That is not Paul at all. It's someone else writing in Paul's name, but that's not Paul. Paul is this inclusive, gracing guy who, has some issues, but doesn't have most of the issues that people write him off for. And so that's why I think it's important that we speak the truth about this stuff, and then and don't think that they don't, like I said, you're going to have the apologists come out and be like, well, the Bible was able to be written in that way, or it got, well, the fact that it got into the canon, they'll always have a way to justify it being there, because they're just, we start pointing out contradictions, it's like their house is built on, cards, and everything has to be perfect. And if there's one slip, the whole thing falls. That's not where my faith is. I mean, my faith is, I'm not even worried about afterlife. I'm not even thinking about the afterlife. If I was thinking about the afterlife, I might not even be talking to you guys about this stuff. I'm thinking about the here and now and the story we find ourselves in, and how horrific the world is right now, and how much we could use each other. You are totally nuts, but that's okay. We're all totally nuts as well. I'm just saying, I'm kidding. So I was responding to a message on YouTube. Someone was saying that revolution makes them feel not totally nuts, but this is the stuff that goes on in this crazy head of yours, and look of yours, not mine, in my crazy head. Almost done, folks, I promise. So what happened to the ideas that we see in Matthew 11:28? Oh, we're back at Matthew. We're jumping back again. Let's look at this. Hey, one more thing. Don't forget to like and subscribe or review. Leave a review for us. I've been listening to too many podcasts. Soon I'll be doing like advertisements for smoothies. This great smoothie passes through you like the Lord. But listen to this. In 11:28 in Matthew, it says, "Come to me, all you that are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And what if we, as people who I'm a follower of Jesus, I don't even like the word Christian barely anymore. It's so loaded. But I also like to kind of use it because I like to kind of reclaim it. But this idea, what if we actually were these folks? What if this is what we brought to the table, is to these people who are so caught up in legalism and judgmentalism? I mean, think about how miserable they are because they're all pretending to have their shit together. You know, and then you've got these people on the left who are like, well, I just really care about, I'm the people, we really care. We really care. But you're just doing the same thing if you're only caring about certain groups of people. Don't tell me how compassionate you are and then say you're dancing on the graves of one person, then waiting for another person to die to be even more inappropriate. Don't tell me that that's compassionate and loving. It might be, but it's the same as saying, well, I only love and show compassion to the people who agree with me and think like me and act like me, and I don't do it for my enemies. So you're really, in a way, rebelling against the very words of Christ of loving your enemies and doing good to those who persecute you. You're rebelling against the concept of Christianity. You're separating yourself from that message and finding another message. And the thing is if you're doing that in the representation of Christianity, then you're kind of setting out a bad example. You're saying, well, this is it. And that's just not the example that's not Christianity. You know, you should say like, hey, I'm really happy this guy died. And as a Christian, I shouldn't say that. Or as a Christian, you know, I can say that because I'm covered by grace, but that's not what, you know, that's not what Christ taught. You know, at least make it clear, you know, as a person who might do that type of thing. Because imagine if we were these type of person who said, you know, I am gentle and humble in heart. Like if we gently and humbly dealt with people, it would be a different world. But we live in a world that's just so cruel right now. Just a cruel, cruel world. We're all, you know, and it's so easy to just step into that judgmental attitude and that cruelty, you know, and despair. But at the same time, when I look at the despair of these children in Gaza, and I look at the despair of these families being torn apart, you know, all over the country who are trying to become, you know, some of them are really trying to become legal, and they're, you know, they're being thrown into these cars and almost kidnapped in the middle of the night, you know, kidnapped in the day, families being torn apart, kids being left at school, you know, and I see that kind of stuff. It just, it goes, okay, there's the real suffering. There's the real suffering, you know. Maybe my religious trauma is, yes, it's legitimate trauma, but it's not like that. And I almost feel like if we have those things, we should be screaming out onto the streets and to the people of like, this has got to stop. What this is happening is horrible. And anybody trying to use God or Jesus to justify this, we must say that is not it. We don't have to say that person's an asshole and crazy. We could just say that person is misguided, that person is wrong, and this is not Christianity. This is not the Christ I understand. I saw a thing the other day, a news report saying some Christians say empathy is a sin. And I left a little thing underneath, and it was a AP news story. And I just went underneath and I said, no, that's not true. And matter of fact, it would be the opposite of the teachings of Christ. You know, I mean, I do think it's heresy, you know, and I think it's a way for them to justify their hate or their separation from others, which I believe is sin. And I think to say that empathy is sin is a sin. I think that's separation, because I think really what we're supposed to do is about reunion, and grace is reunion, as Paul Tillich tells us, the wonderful theologian and philosopher. So imagine if we were the type of people that people saw us and said today, and I'm weary, and when I'm carrying a heavy burden, when I've set up impossible standards in my life, where a Pharisee could look at Jesus and go, maybe there's some hope there. You think, you know, like Maybe in their night when they were sleeping, they could think, maybe I don't have to live in a self-imposed hell anymore. Maybe I don't have to hate myself anymore. And maybe God doesn't really hate me. Maybe I really am accepted. I even like to use the word God. I like how Tillich says the ground of being, or this idea of accepting that you're accepted by that greater than yourself. I've been thinking a lot about the Lord's, is it the Lord's Prayer or the Serenity Prayer? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and the courage to change the things I can. It's just a brief, it's not the whole thing, but I've been thinking about that lately and just saying, how do we learn to accept the things we cannot change and the courage to change the things we can? Like, yes, okay, I might be powerless here, but what's the courage for me to be a bit of a light over here in this world, or on this message board, or on this Fox, YouTube, or on whatever, or in life, or in reality? What's stopping us from being the person that when people see you going, oh yeah, I help carry heavy burdens, I'll tell you the truth, but I'll try to be as gentle and humble about it as I can. I remember, I don't know, Christianity is so screwed up, or should I say Christians, or maybe just people in general, are so screwed up. Like, this might just be a human thing. This is not necessarily just Christians. You see this we see this chaos happening everywhere with all sorts of different types of faiths, with all sorts of different types of people. So, it might not just be that this is about Christianity. It just might be that this is just a human thing that we follow ourselves into. I mean, I even remember in the 12-step group, there were some people we called big book thumpers, and they were like Bible thumpers, and they ran the program really rigid. Had no room for error, getting sober. And for me, that would be like a destiny to drink again. That would be like, okay, if you want to you're going to do this to me, I'm going to break under the pressure. And there were clubhouses in New York that I remember would require that you wore suits and things like that. And I'm like, there's a group of people that really works for, and they need that. But for me, I would be crushed underneath that type of structure, And so for me, that's a very human way of thinking, is that some people need different types of structures, and we have to make sure that we understand that as well. So yes, it's complicated. But I hope we'll try to figure out better ways to understand this. So that's why I read psychology. That's why I read philosophy. I like theology. That's why I read scholarship, because I want to understand our human condition better every day. I know it's probably crazy for me as a pastor of 30 years to think that some folks would be better off without Jesus, or at least what we have made him into. But honestly, I know a lot of people who left the church and became much kinder, much more loving, much more God-centered people after they left the church and they left their faith. They seem to become more Christ-like by their love for others and the love for other people and their acceptance of themselves and their acceptance of their children and their acceptance of people around them. And they stepped out of almost this very militant, judgmental, angry way and became better human beings, as though they were free, as though they stepped into, as though they found salvation from Christianity. And that's just the truth. That's the truth. Like me sharing my struggles with depression. It is bad right now. I'm not going to lie. But, and that with Christianity is that some people do a lot better without it, at least the version that they have. And they may never be able to return. I mean, I have one buddy who I've known for years, and he's really got a heart of gold, but every time he gets involved with the religion, he keeps switching out different forms of Christianity. I think, now he's in Catholicism, and every time he gets in the religion, he wants a structure. He wants to be told who's the bad guy. He wants to be told who. So now he doesn't even talk to his own children, but when he's not stuck in those religious things, when he gets the disillusionment with each new different chapter of part of Christians that he tries and he leaves, out comes the kindness and the love and the grace and the hope. So we need to ask ourselves, why does that happen? Why is it that we can probably definitely say there's more people who don't believe in God who are more loving and graceful than people who do? or follow Jesus, say they follow Jesus. You don't have to believe in God and all that stuff to follow Jesus. You can follow Jesus, you know. I'm a very Paulinian follower of Christ, but genuine Paul, not reactionary Paul. So anyway, I hope that gives you some sort of hope today. I know it was a lot. I know it was heavy. I know it's probably not our usual cup of tea that we have. It's not a very uplifting talk, but it is a talk, and that's what you got. Just a reminder, Revolution could really use your support. We're nonprofit. You can donate by going to revolutionchurch.com. We have Venmo and we have PayPal, and we can give you a tax write-off through both of those. And it's a tax deductible donation. And right now, that's all the income I'm getting is from Revolution. And I've not probably gotten a quarter of my check this month. It's been really tough. I had to take out a loan to pay my rent. So there you go. There's the reality. But it's my kid's birthday, so I wanted to be able to do that and celebrate my son. So I would love to do more with Revolution. I would love Revolution to become my full-time job again. There's no way I can say that that's not true. I mean, if I have to be a tent maker, so be it. But I would love to be able to do this full time again, maybe even have a community one day. I don't know, because I just know how compelled I am to do this. You know, I'm like, and money doesn't seem to be the really big issue for me anymore. Like, I know that it's not like there's times where I want to be like, if money doesn't come in, I'm going to quit. But I know I probably won't, because there's this compulsion to do this work and that I love and am passionate about, and to hopefully communicate that love and grace and compassion to others. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe here. Turn on the notifications. You'll get a little ding every time I post something up, put clips. Sometimes I just record a thought and load it up here, and you'll be able to see that. So thank you all for your love and grace. Let's go out there and let's maybe be the people who are like, hey, I'm going to be a little bit more humble, a little bit more graceful out there with people. And we don't have to attack each other to prove that we're right. I think that's what a beautiful example of my mother was, is that she just never attacked anybody. She never met an enemy. And I meet more and more people my whole life. I just keep meeting more people who were affected by her just complete love and grace and silliness and acceptance that she had. And so I think that's a testimony within itself. Thanks a lot, everybody. I will see you next week, if not before then. All right. Bye-bye.